known as a baseball town. It's presented by Dan Genovese, aka Gunner Genovese. Dan is an author and historian of Westfield baseball history, winner of the 2010 Westfield Historical Commission's annual Preservation Award, and captain and refounder of the Westfield Wheelmen Baseball Club. Dan.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes. All right, very good. First of all, thank you, Candy. Great introduction. And of course, thank you to the Westfield 350 for having me here. You know, when they announced they were looking for series of lectures, and I think I contacted them. They didn't contact me. So I wanted to give this presentation. And of course, thank you all for coming. This is really, you know, Westfield is truly a baseball town. So I just wanted to, you know, first of all, thank you all for coming. And my clicker, hit the next slide. A little bit more about who I am. I was born in Westfield. Not many people can say that anymore. And not, you know, since Noble Hospital does not have a maternity ward anymore. So, you know, which is unfortunate because, you know, if you live in Westfield and you have a child, you have to go to Springfield and Holyoke. So Springfield and Holyoke gets credit for having a Major League Baseball player, not Westfield. So we need to change that. I play and played baseball in Westfield, all levels of baseball, and to this day I play vintage baseball, and I also play softball down at Whitney Playground. I'm also the author of the old ball ground books, which we'll talk about in a few minutes here quickly. And Candy said I'm the 2010 Historical Commission Preservation Award for my research, as well as playing vintage baseball and bringing the game back to life. And other than that, I do have a daytime job. I work for a company called OMG in Agawam, Massachusetts, so I do have a day job. So unfortunately, if I could make money doing this, I would prefer to do this. So, all right, so here we are, the Wheelmen. We do have a game coming up in Westfield on May 19th. And post-parade, that's the parade day, and that'll be at Yockham Field. So if you want to see some old-time baseball, please come to Yockham Field post-parade. If you hadn't had enough of the Westfield 350 stuff, come to the game. So we'll have a good time down there. All right? Okay, here's the old ball ground books. And you know, when I started doing my research, I had no intention of writing 2 books on baseball, and I could fill several hours of presentations like this. But you know, I started doing research only because I was looking through some books and looking at people who were born in Massachusetts who played Major League Baseball. And then I found 2 people who were born in Westfield that played Major League Baseball. And when you look around the city, you look in history books, you know, you look at the history books of Westfield, there's very little, there's nothing about these gentlemen that I found. All right. So as I was doing more research, I kept going. It was like peeling an onion, the information I was finding. In fact, the textbook of baseball history was written in the 1960s by Harold Seymour called Baseball. And I was reading this book, and as I said, it's a textbook. So everything I found in the Seymour book happened in this area. Hit the next slide. All right. But a little bit more background, okay? My grandparents, from my mother's side, came to America and came to Westfield in the 1880s. And my father's parents came from Italy, and they came in the 1910s. So I do have a long-range history here in Westfield as far as my background. And this is my mom in the 1940s holding a bat. And you can see a ball there. I'm not sure where it's going, but you know, hope mom's okay. So I had to give my mom some props because you know, she really ingrained the history in anything with me. So she'd be very proud tonight seeing this presentation and seeing you all here. So thank you. All right. And of course, the future's in good hands. I have my grandson here, PJ, and so he lives in Westfield. So like I said, the future's in good hands for baseball in Westfield, and we're training him well, even though he has a Yankees shirt on. But we'll talk about that in a minute. So. So let's get the crowd going here. I raise your hand. Tell me if you've played baseball or softball, or if you play baseball or softball, or the game has touched you in some emotional way. You know, was it okay? Well, that's good. That's good. Very good. All right. The game touches a lot of people. All right. Next question. Raise your hand high if you're a Yankees fan. Okay. A few of you here. And let's see the Red Sox fans. Whoa! Red Sox win. All right. Are there any other fans of other teams? The Orioles. All right. Well, very good. Very good. All right. So now that we got our blood going, so thank you. Let's get to the next slide here. Let's get this thing going. So, hope we can get this done in 45 minutes to an hour. Let's do the best I can. So here's my goal for the presentation: to make this presentation fun, memorable, and to educate the residents of Westfield as to the importance of the history of baseball, not just nationally, but especially in Westfield, which in my opinion is just as important as whips, cigars, and bicycles. It's America's game, and Westfield has been a part of it from the beginning, no question about it. And this is a great picture of Bullens Field. I believe that's on opening weekend in August of 1938, courtesy of Bruce Cordes. Thank you, Bruce. This is a great picture of Bullens Field in its first few days of operation.
Where's that?
Bullens Field. That's the recreational park. Yep. So, in doing my research, one of the most fascinating things I found was the passion that the Westfield people had for the game of baseball. Now, you got to put yourself in their shoes, okay? There was no, of course, this goes without saying, there was no internet, there was no cell phones, there was no TVs, there was no radio, there was newspapers. I don't even think there was indoor plumbing, okay? So what did you do on a late summer day in the 1880s, 1870s, 1890s? You went to a baseball game. That's what you did. And you went in droves. And the passion that people had for the game was where we are today. Why did this happen? Why did the game develop so strongly in this area, especially Westfield? Well, of course, you have to the east, you have Boston. You have to the west, you have Albany in upstate New York. And you have down south, New Haven, New York. And it's the baseball triangle in the middle. And what connects everything? The railroad. Very good. The railroad connects everything. It's so important, and we'll talk about that, the connection from New York and to Boston and western and eastern New York. Okay, so here's the starting lineup today. We're going to talk about the hollow grounds in Westfield. We're going to talk about a very early game called wicket ball. We're going to talk about the 19th century teams. We'll touch on them. We're going to talk about our two Westfield natives that played in Major League Baseball, Mr. Allen Hubbard and Adonis Terry. And we'll briefly get into the 20th century up to about World War II. Okay, so here are the hallowed grounds of Westfield. And you will see right here, we are right here. Right here is the old ball ground. Okay, that's where General Shepherd is today. A little further south was where they first started playing the game of wicket ball and baseball, which eventually moved over to Mosley's Park, that race. You always see that picture of the racetrack in these maps. That's Mosley's Park, where they had a baseball diamond right in the middle of the horse track. All right, and then you also had a ballpark up at Warnoco Park up here, which is just cut off on the screen. That is, of course, just beyond Stanley Park, across from Westfield State College. And then we move over to the North Elm Street grounds, which is sort of where Dunkin' Donuts is today. There was a very commonly played ball ground there called the North Elm Street grounds. Then, of course, there's Whitney, which is still around today, and of course Bullens Field. So those are the main hallowed grounds of Westfield. Okay, so this should not be a surprise to anybody who even mildly follows the game of baseball. Abner Doubleday did not invent baseball, okay? No one invented baseball. He was a convenient Santa Claus, Easter Bunny kind of an idea, a Civil War hero. Hey, he invented baseball. It sounded great. Upstate Cooperstown, New York is beautiful. It was a great idea, but it wasn't true. He did not invent the game. In fact, he was nowhere near Cooperstown in 1839 when the game was invented. So what did happen? All right. Well, go ahead. Okay, so the current historian of Major League Baseball, John Thorne, and this is in his latest book, has noted, "I am persuaded that the childhood games of England and Western Massachusetts are indeed baseball when they involve a bat, a ball that is pitched or thrown to the bat, where there's two sides, alternating innings, multiple safe havens, whether bases or stones or stakes, in a round circuit of the havens that scores a run. This is new publication. This just came out a few years ago. Okay, so John Thorne, the Major League Baseball historian, is now saying the game was developed in Western Mass. Okay, so what? Hello? All right, go ahead, next slide. Okay, so what did it develop from? Okay, well, we talked about the game of wicket ball, and wicket ball came to America with the first settlers in Westfield. And in fact, according to John Thorne, he goes on and says, I feel certain that at least from 1767 the game was played, practically unabated interest, particularly in Hartford and Litchfield counties, up to the middle of the 19th century. So now they're saying that wicket might even be pre-cricket, so, which is interesting. So also, here's, and this is going to be interesting, you're going to love this, okay? According to a soldier at Valley Forge, he wrote in his diary, George Hewing writes, this day, His Excellency, Washington, dressed, what does it say? I can't read this, it's a very, no. So General Washington and General Knox joined in and played a game of wicket ball at Valley Forge, okay? Who else was at Valley Forge that we all know? Anybody? That's right. Colonel Shepard was at Valley Forge. Okay. The irony of all this is General Shepard, of course, is facing south on Broad Street. So General Shepard is in center field. So if we're thinking about moving Mr. Shepard around, we should not do that. Mr. Shepard is in center field in the old ball ground. So let's leave him where he is. Okay. So the game of wicket ball, as we said before, was played in Litchfield County and Hartford County. As you can see, we have a ball. All right, we have a ball. We have a bat, which looks like a hurling bat. We have a post, which is very similar to something like cricket. Okay, but let's go to the next slide. This is a etching from 1821 from John Cheney in Manchester, Connecticut, and this was recently unearthed, where they determined, well, this is wicket ball. This is not cricket. This is not baseball. You know, and when I started doing my research about wicket ball, I couldn't find anything else written about the game of wicket ball. When I started doing my research in 2001, there was nothing. I couldn't reference any other game. I thought maybe it's just another name for cricket. So after I published my first book in 2004, all of a sudden more stuff became available, which got someone like John Thorne interested to dig deeper, And it's hard to believe that this day and age, they're still digging up the origins of the game. So as I said, the game was not invented, it evolved. And this game here was Western Mass's version of baseball and early baseball. In the Westfield newsletter of April 5th, 1847, we are glad to see the games of football and wicket so fashionable this spring. There is in many places and sometimes here a strong tendency among the male portion of the rising generation to brush their clothes nicely and lay themselves away choicely where the sun will not spoil their complexions, and to neglect as unmanly and undignified those rough athletic sports which years ago exercised the muscles and symmetrized the forms of young men. So this was 1848, and this is a wicket ball area, as you can see, very similar to cricket, you know, commonly played in various towns in Litchfield County and Hartford County. Other than Westfield, a place called Beach Hill, East Granville, East Parish. As you can see, all the towns listed up here. This was a very common game, and as Mr. Thorne said, it's very unabated. In fact, in my research, one of the gems of my research is that Westfield played Granville, right? And there was such an intense game. There was a post-game brawl. They actually had a post-game brawl, fighting over the game. And because the paper was published once a week, there was constant bickering in the paper about this one game of wicket ball that ended in a brawl. Now, normally these things end in dinners and speeches and all that good stuff, but not this day. So it was very passionate, the people of the area about this game of wicket ball. Okay, and as I said before, there's the ball about the size of a softball, and as I said before, there's more and more information coming about the game of wicket ball and how it developed into baseball. Go ahead. Okay, so let's talk about 19th century town teams. Okay, let's talk about the Atwaters. From 1858 to 1859, they were formed as an exercise and recreation club. They played on North Broad Street, which is the old ball grounds, as I said before. Ken Burns Special, if you notice their great uniforms, there's a segment in the Ken Burns Baseball Special where this picture appears. What they're highlighting is the uniforms and how dashing they looked. There's no reference in the show about the team from Westfield, the Atwaters, but they're in the series, so that's kind of a nice thing. Of course, there was not many other teams in the area at the time, so they would play inter-squad games. They would play games with teams from Springfield and Northampton. They were also playing the New York style of baseball. And the New York style of baseball is the modern diamond that you see today. Other teams in the area were playing the Massachusetts game, which was 4 bases and actually a 5th base. And according to the Northampton Gazette, when they played Northampton, they said there seemed to be some considerable difference of opinion on vital points in the rules. So how did Westfield start playing the New York game? Well, you know, it's speculation, but it's obvious to me. It's the railroad coming up from, you know, we're going down and selling whips and cigars. So they got to come up. We're going down. So there's talk about baseball, and so that's my theory. Okay. They're also Civil War heroes, because in 1860, the spring of 1860, they didn't form. They all went off to war, and there was, as far as I know, there was 1 prisoner, and that's what fueled the development of the game of baseball. Was the Civil War, was the prison camps. Because you had all these young men together. What are they going to do? Whether they're from the north or from the south, they're going to play ball. All right? And they're going to mix rules, and they're going to come up with the game of baseball. And that's where the game really developed. It continued on. Go ahead. So now we're going to move on to 1878 to 1883, the Fireman Baseball Club. And this picture is a picture that you see in the Westfield picture books. All right? But who are these people? Well, they were an amateur team, but they sold tickets to games. All right? Typically, you'd have 500 to 1,000 people in attendance. Okay, that's a large amount of people to come to a baseball game on a regular basis at that time period. Some were actual firemen, which I'll show you in a minute. Over the 6-year period, 58 players were on the roster and played the game. It was certainly the gateway to the major leagues. 9 of these players eventually made it to the major leagues. Now, this was at this time period in the early 1880s was an expansion of Major League Baseball. So so Major League Baseball was constantly looking for players, hearing about players, and bringing them up to the major leagues. They played at Mosley's. They started out playing at the old ball ground, then eventually moved to Mosley's Park. It was certainly a favorite stop among barnstorming teams because of the railroad. Professional teams would come to Westfield, play for a few bucks, and move on. The Washington Nationals came to town and beat the Firemen 11-0. But you know, so that's kind of interesting. The Washington Nationals came to town, and amongst their rivals is of course Holyoke. This is where the Holyoke rivalry started when they're playing the Westfield Firemen. Next slide. This is a picture of Herbert T. Snow, captain of the Westfield Fire Department, and also captain of the fireman team. What's interesting about this photo is my mother found this photo at a tag sale somewhere many, many years ago. So your assignment tonight and this weekend, when you go home, go through all your pictures, go through your Radix, look for these photos, because they're somewhere in this town. There's photos of these players. All right, don't just throw them away. Don't send them up to Twist Street. Let's keep them here. All right, let's get them to the library so they can house them. If you have any questions about the photos, feel free to contact me. I'd love to see what we got from this audience. Okay, one of the biggest surprises of my research about the Westfield Firemen was not a baseball player, but one of the players was Walter Camp. And of course, Walter Camp was the father of American football. Okay, and Walter Camp Went to school at Yale, of course, where he was, he was the Yale coach. He was an unpaid advisor on football. And a couple of notes here. Late 1870s, he went to Yale, excelled in all sports, especially football. But his goal was to make the game safer, interesting. And by the time a friend of his, Alan Hubbard, which we'll talk about in a minute, came to Yale in the early 1880s, Mr. Camp was a grad student playing baseball. Okay, so they became good friends. He was on the Westfield Firemen baseball team. After he only had 1 year in grad school, then he moved on, became a salesman for a clock company. Okay, and of course, for a salesperson, you got to be on the road, right, King Bill? Got to be on the road. Of course, you get on the train. You're going north to south. Hooked up with his buddy Alan Hubbard and played baseball on the Firemen. So that's the connection there. And during this time period was the most influential time period in Walter Camp in the development of the modern game of football. I don't know if Westfield had any connection to that, but before Walter Camp, they went from 25 players per side on the field to 11 players per side. And this was all developed in this small time period. Mr. Camp developed plays from scrimmage, and also he developed the quarterback position all during this time period. So it's an interesting little tidbit for you. Go ahead. Okay, of course, it's not all fun and games. These players took the game serious, right? And so let me read to you a newspaper account here. This is something I wrote. Some of this is a newspaper account, but Westfield Fireman pitcher Arthur Williams was jailed and fined $10 for physically assaulting the editor of the Times and newsletter, Lyman Clark. Williams had taken exception to some harsh criticism by Clark in the Times and newsletter of a recent pitching performance and decided to take action. On an August night in 1883, Williams jumped Clark on Franklin Street and proceeded to rough him up. According to Clark, Judge Lewis at the court proceedings came down hard on Clark and called his paper scurrilous, if not libelous, and said if Lewis was not the judge, he would have administered a dose of the same medicine on me himself. So, it was not all fun and games, that's for sure, and they took the game serious. So, but there's more gems in the history of Westfield baseball, and I want to read something, one more thing here. In 1883, at the close of the baseball season, the writer of the newspaper wrote a baseball parody. And I'll read it to you. The melancholy days have come, the dullest of the year, when firemen's shouts no more are heard, no more visitors cheer. Deserted is the baseball field, and empty is the stand. From it is gone all life, and sound whatever made it grand. The first and second base are flown, the pitcher and the third, while in the field are no longer. The umpire's call is heard, where the players, the strong, the young, that lately sprang and stood. In brighter light and softer air, a champion brotherhood. The rain is falling where they played, in the cold October rain will keep them all from coming back match games to try again. When falls the frost from heaven, another home run they'll make, preferring to be in than out, whatever the stake. And now, when comes the calm, mild day, all still such days come, to call the squirrel and the bee from out from their winter home. The south wind seeks for amateurs whose baseball notes he bore, and sights to find them in the park and on the road no more. I mean, this is fantastic stuff, buried forever. When you read this stuff, it's like, where is this stuff? It's buried in microfilm. That's where it's buried. So there's gems at the Athenaeum. So, or these books, by the way. Go ahead. Let's talk about the Westfield wheelmen and the Westfields that picked up where the firemen left off. Next slide. Okay, pretty much they picked up where the firemen left off. They played at Mosley's Park, eventually moved on to Warnoco Park, as I mentioned before, up near the college. They played at North Elm Street grounds. 6 of the players made it to the major leagues. They were joined in the Hampshire-Hamden League, which included teams from Holyoke, Northampton, East Hampton. And of course, a favorite coming to Westfield was Barnstormers. And And this is a great quote from the Times and Newsletter in August of 1897. There has always been one thing that Westfield could defy the world in, and that was baseball. Isn't that a great quote? So, next slide. Okay, talking about barnstormers, the Cuban Giants came to Westfield in 1890, 1892, and I believe a couple times in 1897. Of course, they weren't Cuban, they were African American, because no one wanted to play African Americans, right? So they were Cuban, so they would talk gibberish. They would talk gibberish, so people thought they were Spanish. And this is kind of a weird quote, but I put it in anyways. Curtis of the Westfields posed several days last week as a Cuban Giant and has been busy ever since, it is said, digging lamp black out of his ears. So, make of it what you will. This is actually a ticket from the Westfields and Cuban Giants. And see, someone wrote the score 17-9, so Westfield had their way that day. We're going to talk more about the Giants in a minute. Okay, let's talk about a little bit of a rivalry here. So at the end of 1897, Westfield, in the October of 1897, they had a one-game playoff with Holyoke. Westfield had won 8 games in a row to get back in this race. So it came down to Holyoke and Westfield. Leading up to the game, there was talk of ringers, bringing in, major league players, because the season at the major league level had ended at this point. So there was talk about getting the best players available. All right. Of course, Westfield won, right? A huge victory celebration took place, and I'm going to read this to you here. I promise not to read too much more, but this goes without saying. Okay. So as soon as it became apparent at Holyoke Saturday afternoon that the Westfields were sure of a victory, the good news was sent back to Westfield, where the Cleveland Wheel Band was routed out and taken to the depot to meet the conquering heroes. And what a time there was for about a half hour after the train arrived. With the band at the head, the directors next, the victorious 9 third, and 200 or 300 rooters in the rear, the line of march was taken up through Elm Street, around Park Square, and back to the rooms of the Young Men's Social Club. There was plenty of enthusiasm, and red fire was burned by the barrels along Elm Street, and there was cheering galore. Thousands of people, it says, lined the sidewalks, and players, as they appeared, were given a big ovation. All the players in the deciding game, except Corrin, were presenting the line. Also McBride and others who played at times during the season. Public demonstration consisted of only the street parade, while the members of the 9 were entertained at the rooms of the club during the evening. The demonstration along the line of march was very encouraging, and the outlook for another season is certainly very bright. The reception home of the 9 was a fitting close to the day's conquests. That is unbelievable. Can you imagine that, having that today? A big parade, people following this team down the street. That's fantastic. So, next slide. Okay, let's talk about Mr. Alan Hubbard, Westfield's first major leaguer. Okay, Alan Hubbard, of course, was born in Westfield in 1860. To the Hubbard family, education was a top priority. His father was part of the school department at the time. Mr. Hubbard formed a baseball club at Westfield High School in 1879. In 1880, he was a Westfield High graduate. He gave a speech on physical culture in the First Congregational Church. I don't think it was this particular building, but help me here with the historians of the church. Was this building in use at the time? Okay, so I can feel Mr. Hubbard here tonight. So the ghosts are here, right? He went to school in Yale for engineering, and of course to play baseball. Okay, this is a picture of the 1882 team. That's Mr. Hubbard here in the front row with the catcher's mask, and as you can see, above his left shoulder is Walter Camp. Okay, during this time period, Yale baseball was they were the intercollegiate baseball champions perennially, year after year after year, and of course, Mr. Hubbard was the catcher during the 82 and the 83 season. The next, so in 1883, of course, they voted him captain, and captain wasn't just the locker room captain. He was the manager of the team. He was the field general and the manager of the team. He would make the lineups. he was more than just a captain, because that's what the captains were called at the time. He was also tough. Okay, and you had to be back then, because this is all you're wearing for a catcher's mask, and then you have very little equipment for gloves. All right, well, we'll talk about this. And according to the New York Times, June 2nd, 1883, in the 7th inning, Hubbard, Yale's catcher, was violently hit by a swift foul ball which drove the wires of his mask into his forehead, causing a bad cut. He kept playing after some delay. So you were a tough guy if you were a catcher. You had to be. Oh, actually, go back. Can you go back one slide? Okay. Two Hubbards. There's Hubbard there on the fence, and in order for you to sit on the fence, you had to be the captain. Any Yale picture of a football, baseball player, if you're sitting on the fence, you were allowed to do that. To his right is Daniel Albion Jones, which we'll talk about him, Jumping Jack Jones. To Hubbard's left is a player that played for the Firemen as well, S.A. Booth. Doesn't mean anything really, but he's a Yale player as well. So move on to the next slide. Okay, Mr. Hubbard had a cup of coffee in 1883. What's a cup of coffee? It's a player that plays for a very short time in the major leagues. His Yale battery mate, Daniel Jumping Jack Jones, and Hubbard graduated together. And for the summer of 1883, they bounced around professional baseball in the New York, Long Island area, and eventually got noticed. And in September, Jones and Hubbard signed with the Philadelphia Athletics. And so Hubbard's first game was at Columbus, Ohio. He played shortstop, but he played under a false name. He did not play as Alan Hubbard. He played as Al West. And why? Was he hiding from his parents? Was he he could be hiding from his parents because, you know, his parents didn't want him playing baseball, this rough and tough game by thugs. He's a Yale grad. He's an engineering grad. Why should he be playing with these thugs? They didn't like that. Education, that's what it was all about. Or was he hiding from contract restrictions of baseball at the time? You know, the reserve clause in baseball, you could be released, but you had to wait about 10 days before you could sign on with another team. Of course, there was no, you know, you could sign on and they're going to see his name, West, in the box scores in the papers. Doesn't mean anything, okay? So, of course, Al West, that's kind of interesting, the name he chose. You know, because could it be something for Westfield? A little something there? I mean, you have to think about that, right? So, 2 days later, he did catch under his name, Al Hubbard. He caught for Jumping Jack Jones. He lost 11-2. And unfortunately, Hubbard's career, Major League Baseball career, was over, okay? So this is Jumping Jack Jones, who had a very unique style of pitching. He would jump up to the pitching box and throw the ball. Very unique style of pitching. That's why he was called Jumping Jack Jones. Next slide. Okay, but there was one other event here we should talk about in September of 1883, which kind of connects Hubbard and Terry together. Okay, Hubbard signed on with the Brooklyn minor league team at the time before they became a major league team, and as you can see in the box score, he again played under Al West, and he caught for Adonis Terry. So you had the Westfield battery here for a very short, just one game on professional baseball. So that's Al West catching and Adonis Terry pitching. So again, it's amazing what you find once you start digging. And this is September of 1883. In a minute when we get to Terry, we're going to talk about a little bit what they met before on the ball field. Next slide. Okay, this is Mr. Hubbard here at a college reunion baseball event in Boston. He returned to Westfield after his major league career. He played for the Westfields. By 1890, he moved to the Boston area, became a respected construction engineer. He was active in many business and fraternal clubs. He was married with 2 children, and sadly, he passed away in 1930 on his 70th birthday. All right, I have this McGreevy's logo here. Enough said. If you've ever been to the Third Base Saloon in Boston, right near Fenway Park, this picture is there. So, and that's Mr. Hubbard there on the left-hand side. So, if you're ever in Boston, you're in McGreevy's. Look, try to find Mr. Hubbard. Okay, now this is the gem of my research. William Adonis Terry. The New York Times called him in one quote, the personification of coolness. That is a great quote. I love that quote. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, Mr. Terry was a different breed. Okay, according to the Brooklyn Eagle in 1886, He was strictly a temperate man, gentlemanly in his conduct, on and off the field, and a credit to the professional class of players in every respect. According to John Montgomery Ward, a Hall of Famer of 19th century baseball icon in 1892, said, "He is a very pleasant, gentlemanly fellow. He is one of the men who do the honor of the profession." Understand, Major League Baseball at the time, as I said before, was thugs. You know, these were not highly educated men, all right? They would take their paychecks and they'd blow it on booze, women, okay? They made a lot of money back then, not the money they make today. But you could make $500 in a factory at the time, you know, around here. They were making $3,000 a year, $4,000 a year, in a very short period of 6-7 months. Gone. Okay, Mr. Terry was different. He was very different about what he did with his money. All right? So just to give you an idea, a beautiful, handsome man. Go ahead, next slide. Here's his career resume. 14 years in the Major League. He's the first starting pitcher in Dodgers history. He won 197 games and lost 196. So he played on a lot of crappy ball teams. 1,500 strikeouts. Check this stat out, 367 complete games. So, which is pretty much his entire record, all right? Justin Verlander, you all know the name Justin Verlander, is playing about the same amount of time. He's 24 complete games. I mean, come on. He's got 367 complete games. Not a bad ERA, 3.74, 2 no-hitters. This guy would be making millions today. Millions, right? 4-time 20-game winner. Here's an interesting stat. 1884 to 1892, his record was 144, 148, a losing record. 1893 to 1897 is 53 and 48. What's so significant about the difference between 92 and 93? Okay, any of the wheelmen here can tell me? They moved the distance back. Okay, 5 feet to where it is today. So in his first part of his career, he was pitching from 55 feet. And in the middle of his career, toward the end of his career, they moved it back 5 feet. Can you imagine they moving it back 5 feet today? That would be impossible. Players couldn't handle it. But he had a winning record at a deeper distance. He was the last pitcher to win 20 games and steal 20 bases in a season. Okay? 1889, 26 wins, 32 stolen bases. He had 106 stolen bases in his career. This is a pitcher now. This isn't, you know, this isn't, back then, this is what you did. You were overall, you were an all-around player, great all-around player. Pitched in 440 games, outfield 216, 32 in the infield, 594 hits. Great all-around player. He helped Brooklyn to win 2 pennants and 1 World Series tie. Okay, that's a great one. This is another one. He umpired as a player. Okay, in his post and playing days, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But just think about it. He was an umpire while he was playing. Okay, you can imagine why. Go ahead. Okay, early years, born in Westfield in 1864. And it's very difficult to dig up information about someone who you don't have information about. You have to really dig and find and dig hard. He developed as a proficient sidearm twirler with all sorts of puzzling curves. You know, when he was growing up, overhand pitching was not in vogue. You didn't overhand pitch, you threw sidearm. He had a natural ability as a ball player, I found some quotes. He watched and learned from the Westfield Firemen baseball team. As a teenager, he pitched locally in Ludlow for a semi-pro baseball team. He left home at the age of 16 after graduating high school to work in a Bridgeport factory, but more importantly, to play semi-pro ball. That's what he wanted to do. Of course, he was down there. It's easier to get noticed. He was spotted by a future Hall of Fame Jim O'Rourke, who recommended Terry to the Brooklyn management and signed on to a new minor league franchise team in 1883. Okay. This is what I wanted to tell you about before. You can't see this, but this is a scorecard where Brooklyn played Yale. And I found this on eBay, okay? And this is years ago I found this. What you're seeing here is on the Yale side, Hubbard led off the game as catching. And on the Brooklyn side, Terry's pitching. Okay, this is fascinating that I found this on eBay. And I was putting bids on it and putting bids on it and putting bids on it. Of course, I lost because it was up like $300, $400. I was like, you know, I was disappointed. So I emailed the person who won it, and I told him what I was doing and all this research, and I said, just give me a black and white copy, I'll pay you $50 or something. He didn't want any money. In fact, he didn't even want reference to finding this gem. He sent me his beautiful color copy of the scorecard and the front of the scorecard, and I thought that was the greatest thing ever. So here in July of 1883, Hubbard met Terry, and this is, you know, there was 2 games that they played together, or played against each other. So what do you think they talked about? Do you think they talked about Westfield, you know, after the game, before the game? Did they go out and have a burger or what? So, I mean, you got to think about this. What did they do down in Brooklyn, New York about hometown Westfield? So you got to imagine all this stuff went on. Okay, again, first starting pitcher in Dodgers history, won 20 games as a 19-year-old. That's a tremendous feat. Completed 55 games started. These guys were workhorses. They didn't have, as I said, you know, these guys worked and worked. They didn't have a 5-man rotation and 10 relief pitchers and specialty pitchers. You pitched, you hung in there, whether you're getting clobbered or not. Interesting note here, in June of 1884, he was one of the first major league players arrested for playing baseball on a Sunday. Okay, because of the blue laws in Columbus, Ohio. They started the game. Constables had stormed the field, but they said the fans were getting angry, so they let the players play. And at the end of the game, they arrested the players. So this is great stuff. You can't make this up, right? Next slide. We're gonna go through here. Okay, where did he get the name Adonis? Okay, well, obviously a very handsome man. Hugh Keogh of the Chicago Times in 1886 coined him the Adonis when he was playing in Chicago, saying that Terry performed with the rare grace of an Adonis and could give Henry E. Dixie a few pointers. This is Henry E. Dixie as a statue in a play called Adonis. So the nickname stuck, and you know, whenever there was Ladies' Day at the ballpark, who do you think they threw as a pitcher? Mr. Terry, because he brought the ladies in, you know, handsome gentleman. So that's where he got the name Adonis. Go ahead. Okay, here's another eBay find. Okay, you can't read it here, but it's someone had it on their scorecard in Brooklyn wrote, Terry is a dandy. All right, this was someone's writing in 1880s here, 1886. Of course, a dandy was a good-looking guy. You know, he was the cat's meow, right? So kind of an interesting thing. What's amazing what you find on eBay. So, but I found this on eBay, and I found someone's handwriting there. There's a couple other comments about other players as well, but right there, Terry is a dandy. So first-hand comments about Terry. Okay, let's talk about his first no-hitter in 1886. On July 22nd, he pitched a one-hitter through 8 innings, won 7-1. 2 days later, he pitched a no-hitter against the defending American Association champions, St. Louis, 1-0. The crowd rushed on the field for Terry, and he was cheered all the way to the club room. All right. The very next day, okay, he pitched 9 innings and won in Pittsburgh 6-3, 7 strikeouts. He had 2 doubles and 2 runs scored, and he pitched against Pud Galvin, the Hall of Fame pitcher. I mean, the very next day after pitching a no-hitter, get out there. You know, this is unbelievable stuff. Next. All right. Of course, back in the day, there was no baseball cards. So what do? They put baseball cards, put baseball figures on old cigarette cards. That's a good thing to promote, isn't it? For the young kids. It was a cigarette pack stiffener, and these things are about the size of a business card. And to find these today you're going to spend $200 no matter what the player is, at least $200. But this is these are his sets of cards for the old Judd cigarette lines in 1887. Some great poses here, and I own 1 card, and I have copies of the other ones. So, next slide. Okay, Terry's off-season training was an innovation. In 1887 to 1888, he hooked up with Phil Casey, a world champion handballist in Brooklyn, New York. And in the off-season, Mr. Terry kept himself in shape, kept himself ready to play, where other players at the time wouldn't start training until they were paid. Most baseball players at the time, you're going to pay me in April, I'll start getting ready in April. Okay? Not Mr. Terry. He was ready off-season. Very unique training habits, and it was very well known and very well talked about in the papers. So, next slide. Okay, 1888, he actually became a father. January of 1888, Terry and his wife gave birth to a baby daughter. Terry has been exercising on the toboggan at Washington Park ever since the event came off, just to keep down the excitement, according to the Brooklyn Eagle. So, next slide. Okay, let's talk about Terry's second no-hitter in 1888. In May 27th, 8 strikeouts was the no-hitter. Pitched well. His well-disguised change of pace bothering the Louisville batters greatly, said the paper. And 3 days later at Brooklyn, pitched 13 innings, hit a walk-off single, and while all the excitement, Terry was the personification of coolness. So here there's a walk-off single, all this craziness going down around him after pitching 13 innings, base hit, wins the game. So great story. Okay, Terry's catchers, Jim Peebles at the time. As you can see, you know, the catcher wore the gloves like this, and there's no fingers on, there's no padding, and this is not Jim Peebles' hands, but this is a catcher's hands in the 1880s after several years of catching. As you can see, very well beat up, you know, and there was no equipment at the time, very limited equipment. And as you can see, I have a catcher's mask here with a bleeding mannequin, just to show the effects. So, it was a tough position for baseball catchers at the time. Next slide. Okay, 1889 World Series, a best of 11 games. Okay, they couldn't get enough. They played the New York Giants, and New York Giants were heavily favored. They had 6 future Hall of Famers, and there was plenty of gambling going on in the stands. Plenty of gambling. All right, that's what you did. Terry won games 1 and 4 against the Giants. Lost games 6 and 11 innings to 2-1. Lost games 8 and 9 on back-to-back days he pitched. First inning of game 8, he took a line drive off the head and kept playing. Okay. And what's interesting about this time period, when the series was over, November, Terry was honored by fans with a diamond solitaire stud for his loyalty in the 1890 season. They're already making sure that he stays on the Brooklyn team because at this time period, there was a lot. There was the Players League was developed, which was the fighting the owners. There was this baseball strike, and most of the major league players developed their own league called the Players League. So Mr. Terry stayed with Brooklyn, and he was very loyal to the Brooklyn team. So again, a very loyal player. All right, next slide. 1890 World Series, best of 7, Brooklyn versus Louisville. Brooklyn was favored. The Players League was denied because the owners of the American Association and the National League didn't want anything to do with the Players League. So they said, no, you cannot play. Terry won game 1 on a 2-hitter, tied game 3 because of poor weather. They didn't finish the game. He lost game 6. Brooklyn lost game 7, so now the series was tied at 3. And the series was suspended due to poor weather and poor attendance. No one wanted to go to the games because it was freezing and awful weather. They had planned to complete in April, but it never happened. It was a casualty of the baseball war, as I mentioned before. What happened is, go to the next slide. 1891 was a challenging year for Terry and all of Major League Baseball because now the Players League was gone, the American Association was gone, so there's only one league. The National League owners had a monopoly. So they cut salaries, they cut rosters, all right, and it was a true baseball war, and the players were the casualty. Terry experienced arm trouble from overuse, really. Brooklyn players provided very little support, were often accused of alcohol abuse as a form of revolt against the owners. So they were drinking before the game, drinking on the field. It was not a pretty year because that was their only retaliation against the owners for cutting their salaries. So that's what they did. In 25 games, he was 6 and 16. Next slide. Okay, 1892 and 1893, in 1 week, he was released by Brooklyn, signed by Baltimore, and traded to Pittsburgh, and where he pitched 51 games for a record of 30 and 16. So he still had the arm, and like I said before, at a longer distance. Next slide. 1894 and 1897, he signed on with the Chicago Colts. That's Cap Hansen's team. Hansen was known as was a bully to umpires, opposing pitchers, and his players, owners, and the press and league officials. He was a tough owner, a tough coach. Best known as a racist, of course. He was, however, a good judge of ball players, and of Terry, he said he always thought well of the tall twirler. And he had a great record, 21 and 14 in 1895 and 41 and 40 overall to end his major league career. And he did sign on with a minor league team, which eventually within a couple years turned to a major league team. This was Connie Mack's team. He was loaned to Connie Mack's team in the Western League. which eventually became the American League. Terry pitched well, but Anson wanted him back, but they had very strict rules about getting players back and keeping players on their team. So in the offseason of 97, 98, Terry looked to the future beyond baseball. He took a job managing a billiard hall and a social club, and in 1898 he signs a very rare home-only contract, where he didn't want to travel. He just wanted to stay home and run his billiard hall, and so it's a very very unique contract at the time. And this was not a major league team, but eventually it turned into a major league team. Next slide. Okay, Terry the umpire, 1894 to 1896 as an active player. Why was he an umpire? Well, Major League Baseball anointed certain players from every team to be the emergency umpire. Why? Because the umpires sometimes wouldn't show up. They were afraid for their lives. All right, so they anointed one player from each team to be the umpire. So Terry he umpired as a player, and in 1900 to 1901 as a full-time umpire in the major leagues. Very short time, but quite unique. And they gave it to Terry because he was level-headed, he knew the rules, and he was a good man. All right, next slide. Post-baseball, he remained in Milwaukee with his wife and son and daughter, opened up a very successful bowling alley, played in national bowling tournaments. He was a great athlete, and he was an executive of the American Bowling Congress. Unfortunately, Mr. Terry passed away at the age of 50, very young age, of pneumonia, a very common problem back in the day. He was the perfect specimen of manhood on and off the field, said the Pittsburgh Gazette in his obituary. So there's Mr. Terry in his obituary picture. So next slide. Now, of course, when you go to the Athenaeum, you do see this artwork, beautiful artwork of Mr. Terry made by David Fitcher, a muralist in Cambridge, Mass. in June of 2010, which is nice to see. I pushed him on this because otherwise you don't see anything about Mr. Terry in this town. Next. So why not a statue? What a great idea to put a statue of Mr. Terry, I would say on the north side of town. You know, as people are coming into Westfield, the Little League teams, the Babe Ruth teams come out of town, you know, Westfield State teams coming in, why not have Mr. Terry in a statue, right? That's intimidating, okay? That would earn us a few more wins, right? So I think we can do this. All right, next. Okay, we're going to move on now. This is the speed round. We're going to talk about 20th century baseball in Westfield. This image on the right-hand side, I lifted from the Westfield High School book of yearbook at 1936, drawn by Thaddeus Plazik. I thought it's a beautiful Art Deco image. It was black and white, but I put some color to it. And I think it's a fantastic image that I had to throw into this slide here. That's the Westfield Athletics in the back. And next slide. Okay, me a little drink here. With the 20th century brings new legends, right? Mr. Henry Williams on the left, Ray Fitzgerald in the center, and Joe Yackham on the right-hand side. Let's talk about each one of these gentlemen here. Next slide. Okay, Henry Hank Williams, obviously an African-American, okay? Born in North Carolina, grew up in Westfield at a very young age, played for the Westfield YMCA team in 1906 to 1907, was the captain of the 07 team. 1909 to 1910, he played for, of course, Westfield High School. He was a captain of the 1910 team and won the Valley League batting title. So this guy was something special. He was something special. From there, he went on to play in many African-American barnstorming teams, the Brooklyn Royal Giants, the Mohawk Giants, the Cuban Giants, the Brooklyn All-Stars, and the New York Stars. Very little information about Mr. Williams here, but that's definitely a feather in our cap in Westfield, having an African-American player play in all these African-American teams. So that's a great one. Next slide. Ray Fitzgerald, born in Chicopee in 1904, grew up in Westfield. He led the Abner Gibbs to Grammar School Championship in 1917. Of course, they didn't have Little League back then, right? So he led the Grammar School Championship, excelled in football, basketball, played for the Westfield Athletics in the mid-1920s, which was a great town team, much like the Firemen and the Westfields and the Wheelmen. Went on to play minor league baseball with the Springfield Hamdens in 1928 to 29. Played with the Bridgeport Bears, which was a minor league team for the New York Giants. Had one at bat. He made the 1931 opening day roster for the Cincinnati Reds. Had one at bat. It's a shame, one at bat in the major leagues. He called it a screaming line drive. Okay, and at this time period, minor league baseball and major league baseball, they were just developing minor league systems. Okay, and I really think he got the short end of this deal, which is sad. Those were the turbulent times. Ray was my neighbor, and as a young boy, often the balls would go into his yard, and he would yell at us. So he was kind of grumpy at that time period. But thing is, had I known then what I know now, I would have appreciated it. I didn't appreciate it. So, next slide. This is a great one. Joe Yackham, late 1910s, superior, all-around athlete for the Green District Grammar School. While in grammar school, pitched in the Industrial League. Now, grammar school, you know, he wasn't like he was 9. Okay, grammar school went all the way up to, or before you went to high school. So he's a little bit older. In 1925, he was a Westfield High School grad, starred in baseball, basketball, soccer, and you know, I can relate to this. He played all summer long with the Westfield High School, the Westfield Athletics, in the Industrial League. He went on to Notre Dame, where he starred in basketball and baseball, 1926 to 29. He jumped around the major leagues for many years, 30 to 34. He was an Industrial League legend in this area. Everybody wanted Yackham to pitch. He was a legend. 1939, became a Westfield Trade School teacher, coach, and athletic director. 1974, Massachusetts Baseball Coaches Association Hall of Fame. And of course, Yackham Field, there's a rock up there with his image on it, and it says, which is great, I don't know if anybody's ever seen this, athlete, coach, teacher, parent, spectator, friend. Okay? I knew Mr. Yackham back in the day. I think we have some baseball royalty here today. Coach, are you here? All right, Jimmy Yackham is here. Jimmy Yackham was just voted to the Western Mass Baseball Hall of Fame, so congratulations. I think I saw Dan Welch. You here too? Yeah, Dan Welch also in the Western Mass Baseball Hall of Fame. Welcome, gentlemen. Okay, so Jimmy was the Legion coach back in the late 1970s that I played on, and I was struggling at the time hitting the curve. Okay, I could hit the fastball, but I couldn't hit the curve so well. I was bailing out. Okay, this is a great story. So one practice on a very hot June Sunday morning, sweat pouring off you, and you know, Jimmy said, hey Dad, get this guy to hit. Okay, so he was sitting over in the corner watching me, and he said he called over 2 players, and they put this huge bench behind me, okay, that forced me not to bail out, because if I bailed out, I'm falling on my ass, okay? So I bailed out several times, but you know what? I learned to hit the curve, and every summer now I get bruises all over my body because I don't bail out from getting hit. So, so that's a great story. Again, knowing now, if I'd known then what I know now, it would have been different. Would have appreciated it more. The irony of this is I today play for Tri-County Baseball for his grandson, for Joe Yackham. So I crossed many eras. That's a great thing. So that's a great story. Next slide. Okay, as we wrap up here, you know, town teams and leagues, the Westfield Athletics, which featured Ray Fitz and Joe Yackham. You had temperance teams that played, which took the place of Babe Ruth teams at the time, but these were temperance teams. You had Pope, you had the Pope Bicycle in the Industrial League, which turned into the River Valley League. So you had a lot of baseball. You can just barely see a picture of Bullens Field on the left-hand side. So, you know, right about the end of beginning of World War II was where it kind of got more modern, and you know, TV came on. So next slide here. Okay, Barnstormers. This is something that Westfield loved to see. So we're going to have you click on just a short video. Click, see if you can mouse on the mouse on this here, and can you? It's a very short video. It's showing on here. Oh, it is. I'm sorry. I guess it's not going to work. So, anyways, I had a very short video of these barnstorming teams. and why fans of Westfield love these colored teams coming to town. You had the Cuban Giants, John Olson Cherokee Indian Baseball Club, who actually played a night game in a circus tent in Westfield in the 1920s. Chappie Johnson Stars, Philadelphia Colored Giants, Buck Ewing Stars, Lizzie Murphy's All-Stars. You had one woman with a bunch of great men baseball players. But the key is these players were playing silent ball. They were playing, you know, they're throwing the ball around. It was a different style of play, warm-ups, and people love to see that. I wish I could show you the video, but I think we're running late anyway. So that's why people in Westfield love these players, because it was an exciting game. And next slide. Maybe. All right. All right, well, there's really nothing left, and then so that wraps up the presentation. You know, I really do appreciate it. I think it obviously went longer than expected, but it's a great stuff. I could fill hours and hours of this. So listen, I'll take any questions you might have tonight. Yes? Okay, the question is, where was Wayne Granger from? He was from Huntington, Mass. So, more questions, come on. More? Come on, one more, somebody.
Teams named Giants.
Yeah, there's a lot of Giants, so I guess they figured it was kind of a scare tactic. That's why they're named Giants, so hey, great stuff, everybody. I really do appreciate it. Oh, we have a question, hold on.
Was in a semi-professional baseball league in northern New Jersey, based out of Little Ferry, New Jersey, and he pitched. He was more or less an infielder, more or less catcher. He pitched against the late Satchel Paige, who was in the Hall of Fame. But I just mentioned it because my father spent his last years in retirement in this area, and he passed away in 1976 in Branford, Mass, and Global Hospital in Westfield, Mass. But I understand that Satchel Paige was a great pitcher. My father pitched against him in
That's exciting. Yes.
Late 30s and early 40s, something like that. Late 30s.
Okay. That's great. That's great. That's a great story. And like I said before, everyone has a connection to the game. Everyone's passionate about the game, and that's a beautiful thing. Stories handed down through the generations, and that's great stuff. Yes, Bruce.
You mentioned the wheelmen.
Yes.
You have some of your wheelmen in your audience?
Yes, I do have some of the wheelmen here. Are they here? Can you stand up, wheelmen? Hey, come on, Jersey Joe, Sizzler Wingate. All right, welcome. And Pistol Pete. Yes, excellent. Great stuff. Any other questions? Yes.
You said that after the parade there was going to be an old-time baseball game, but
That-
I missed which field it was.
Yackham Field, which is behind Bullens, the old Westfield Trade School. So, yes, thanks. Anything else? All right, great job. Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Very well done. Very well done. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Harry Rock, president of the Westfield 350. Thank you again for coming out tonight. I love my Westfielders. You come out and straighten every time we have one of these. Outstanding. Good to see Jim Yockham here in the room. I hadn't seen you before. We even have Senator Humison out here tonight. So thank you, Senator Humison, for coming. You know, it's really interesting. I was impressed how brave the Yankee fans were. Raise your hands. You're a brave soul, but I hope you noticed that you were well outnumbered when the Red Sox fans all went up, which was good to see. You know, it's interesting. These were times when we're talking about, you know, the 1880s and the 1890s of the birth of sport as we know it today. Just to throw a couple of the dates in there that I was thinking about as you were talking, Dan. 1891, basketball gets invented by James Naismith at what was then the International YMCA Training School, now known as Springfield College. In 1895, volleyball gets invented at the Holyoke YMCA. I'm using your pronunciation there, Holyoke YMCA. He was by William Morgan, and he was a graduate, had worked as a student under James Naismith, and he graduated from the International YMCA Training School, again, Springfield College. The game of volleyball then was known as mintonette, and the first publicly played game of volleyball took place at Springfield College, where it was renamed to volleyball. So much of sport as we know it today. And you were talking about football. James Stagg, Alonzo Stagg, who was a huge contributor to the game of football as we know it today, was also one of the coaches and one of the instructors at the International YMCA Training School, again, Springfield College today. So really rich heritage here in the Valley when it comes to sport. Really, really exciting. So we are winding. How many people here have hit every one of these now so far? Every one of them. We're number 11. Oh, okay. The challenge is on. You must hit every one. I'll expect to see you next week. And next week, boy, do we have a fun one. This one was rescheduled on Wednesday, May 1st, again at 6:30 at Westfield State University. So we're going to be going back up Western Avenue. By the way, they have been paving. So you will have a much smoother ride up there, and your car will make it safely to and from. You're in good shape with that. But we do have the Whips of Westfield with Bruce Cordes, who is where? Right in front of me. Bruce is right here, our resident expert when it comes to the whip industry. That is going to be a fascinating topic, the rise and decline of an American industry, where we were 95% of all buggy whips in the world were here until the internal combustion engine came along and put them out of business. But we will hear a lot about that. And then on May 3rd, Friday, 1 to 4, or on a Friday, we'll be celebrating Westfield State University, the student research, with our students, by the way. How about a nice hand and applause for our students at Westfield State University? We are thrilled to have you here at all the lectures, and they are here part of a class, Westfield in, what's the name of it? Westfield in 350? Westfield at 350, under the tutelage of Professor Vanessa Deanna. So, Professor Deanna, thank you so much for bringing them around. But we love having our students with us every week. And then we'll close things down. By the way, next week is in Scanlon Hall, so do not go to Parenzo to Dever Stage where we normally have been. You are going to Scanlon Hall, which is where we kicked off our very first lecture. And our last one will be on May 8th, again Wednesday, back here at our home in First Congregational Church on the Lost Homes of Westfield, closing it out by Dr. Robert Brown, who opened us on the very first one back in November. So it's been an exciting series, and I really appreciate everybody coming and supporting this. You know, we put a lot of work and effort into it. It doesn't mean anything if no one shows up. Of course, we're all, oh my gosh, will they show up? Will they show up? Well, yes, you did show up, and we love it. We are deeply appreciative. The other thing that I want to say is if you have not picked up your rack card of what's happening on the big birthday weekend, 3 weeks, just a little over 3 weeks. 3 weeks from this Friday, we kick off on the big 350th birthday weekend, May 17, 18, and 19. We have a jam-packed schedule. What's not on here is the baseball game. Also, what is not on here, because things came out after these were printed, is the classic car show that's going to take place in the upper parking lot at the Westfield Technical Academy from 10 to 1. So there's other things going on. But if you want to know what's going on in town, from yoga to learning about pollinator gardening to activities on the rail trail to a musical, Time in Westfield, a phenomenal musical that's being put together by Kathy Palmer right now. We have a children's carnival that'll be going on at 5:30. We have a Beach Boys tribute band. We have fireworks. I will promise you this will be a significant fireworks show. You do not want to miss it. It will be in the fields behind the Boys and Girls Club. And as a caveat to that, the City Hall has made a decision. I have nothing to do with it, but I'm just a deliverer of the message. There will not be a 4th of July fireworks show this year because of all the effort going into supporting the 350. So if you want fireworks, we're going to give them to you. So make sure that you come on Saturday, May 18th. And then, of course, the big community parade that will be taking place on Sunday, the 19th, that will culminate our entire celebration. Kicking off at 1 o'clock from Stanley Park, coming down Western Avenue to Court Street, down Elm Street, where it will end basically in the big parking area next to the bus station. We have the mummers coming. We've got all kinds of tractors and cars. We have 45 floats, well over 1,000 marchers that we know of already, theming the parade, honoring the heroes of Westfield, and we certainly want to pay tribute to our veterans in particular from all the many wars and conflicts that they've been a part of. So make sure that you come and be a part of that. We're also asking that you show your civic pride. We love Westfield, we're proud of Westfield. So over that weekend of the 17th, 18th, and 19th, dress up your home, dress up your business, dress up your school, whatever it might be. But put some lights out, just dig into those Christmas lights, and let's light up Westfield like a big, just like we have across the green, and really show our civic pride. I think this would be so much fun to really have some lights out there on everything. We have, raffle. Who did not get a raffle? We think that some of you snuck in without getting a raffle ticket. I need a runner. Matt, get up here. Matt, you can move fast. Come on, come on, come on, come on. We gotta keep this thing going. How about a nice hand for our Westfield State runner here? Fresh off the track team. All right, raise your hands good so we can get you a raffle ticket. We're gonna get those in because we know how you love your prizes. I'm gonna bring Candy back up here. While I'm up here, I also want to say thank you to the First Congregational Church for being a wonderful host. Rick Gaylord is here. Raise your hand, Rick. Thank you very much for hosting us. We love being here. Such a beautiful church, and it just makes me always feel like the town hall and bringing everybody together after the long, hard winter. We do have a reception that will take place right through the door over here. So please take a moment to go in and grab something to drink. They always have something great to eat. Opportunity just to say thanks, ask Dan a few other questions, and just reconnect with friends that we haven't seen over the long, hard winter. The other thing that I will also say, we do have a race series that's going on. We have a total of how many races? We need 5 out of 8. So, and there's still, you can still do it. But we have a race series going on. There's been 8 races planned. We are into the 4th. We're coming into the 4th one, which will take place on Saturday, May 18th, which is the world's fastest 5K that will take place from Westfield State, coming all the way down to Elm Street. But if you enter, whether you run it or walk it, if you enter 5 of the 8, you will get a really nice Westfield embroidered with our Westfield 350 logo on a runner's jacket. So we hope that you will come out and support Westfield from the standpoint of your physical fitness. We have Matt, how are we doing out there? Okay, they're coming up, Candy. Let's bring them up here and we'll get this thing going as quickly as we can to move everybody out. But again, thank you to everybody for supporting. It's hard to believe for me that we're only 3 weeks away, but we've got a great weekend planned for you, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So Matt, you're going to stay here. You're going to pick the numbers for me. I'm working them hard tonight. Can I get another runner? Number 2. There we go. So we've got a couple of the 350 scarves. I know it's getting a little warmer out there, but you'll use these for next year. We have a couple of t-shirts. We have a couple of candy jars. We have one of the 350 coins, which are really, really cool. So we'll pick a number, and Candy, why don't you hold this, and then I can use both of them as runners. Okay. It's a white ticket, 813-9102. 9102. Oh, we have a winner right here. So what would you like? You can hold up what you want, and we'll, you want to start. You got it. Okay, next. We're going to go with a red ticket this time. 682-529. 52. We have it. What would you like? T-shirt. Okay, and if it doesn't fit, come see us afterwards and let's see if we can dress it up for you to get something that fits. We'll go back to a white ticket, just to mix them up a little bit. 813-9104. 9104. All right, come on up. Figure out what you want. We're still going strong here. We're going to go with a red ticket this time. Number is 682-526. 526. Do we have a winner? Yes, we do. How exciting it is to be able to come up. Come on down, as they say in the game show. All right, we're going with we're going to mix those up. I'm going with a white one from down below. 813-9137. 9137. Do I have? Yes, a winner. Come on down. Come on down. Figure out what it is you want. And we have a red one at this point. I think we've got two things left here. 682-484. 484. Oh, yes. Oh, it's one of our students. I love it. Just, what would you like? The scarf? Or the scarf or the mason guard? All right, we have one scarf left. 813-9129. 9129. Anybody? 9129. The excitement mounts because our percentages have gotten better. Oh my gosh, I can feel it. 813-9162. 9162. There we go. All right. So, make sure if you have not picked up your rack card, we have rack cards on the rear merchandise table. We also have the rack cards on the front merchandise table. Get your card for your refrigerator door. Please join us for the reception. Thank you so much for coming. We'll see you next week. Hall.